The Manage Smarter Show is brought to you by SalesCred, the sales skill building solution that empowers sales teams worldwide to multiply sales opportunities by improving perception, accelerating trust building, and by earning repeat business. Get the best-selling book by C. Lee Smith, download the free mobile app, and now sign up for the SalesCred Masterclasses. Book your session now at salescred.com. Welcome to the Manage Smarter podcast with hosts C. Lee Smith and Audrey Strong. We're glad you're here for discussions on new ways to manage smarter, hire, develop, and retain talent, improve results, and propel team performance to new heights. This is the Manage Smarter podcast.
Lee, our guest today says, you can be, he says, a badass leader like that, but also be a good human, going from heroic to humble in your approach as a leader. It's an interesting concept, and I'm interested to see how he sorts that all out.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm really interested about the book is that, it talks about that the idea of heroic leadership is a thing of the past, that leaders don't have to strive to be heroes anymore. We just have to be regular people, but also good leaders, despite that, and all the things that go along with good leadership. But we can cast aside then the desire then to, put on the cape and, fly in and solve the problem and everything like that. It's like, so that's something I'm looking forward to hearing more about.
Absolutely. Welcome to Manage Smarter, everyone. My name is Audrey Strong. I'm the Senior Vice President of Communications here at Sales Fuel.
And I'm C. Lee Smith. I am the CEO and founder of Sales Fuel.
Yes, he is. And Urs Koenig is a former United Nations military peacekeeper and NATO military peacekeeping commander, highly accomplished ultra-endurance champion, just a bit of an underachiever, if you ask me, a widely published professor, best-selling author, and a seasoned executive coach and keynote speaker with more than 30 years of experience helping hundreds of leaders and dozens of executive teams unlock new levels of achievement. And he is the founder of the Radical Humility Leadership Institute. That is where the book name came from, I would imagine, and speaks frequently on the topic of leadership to corporations. He's had some huge clients. Has a PhD in geography, Master of Science from the University of Zurich in Switzerland, and an MBA from the Australian Graduate School of Management. Has 2 teenage sons, lives in Seattle. Urs, thank you for coming. You've been a little busy, slightly busy.
Thank you for having me. No, I gladly make the time. I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So radical humility. Some of the things I read about this, I want to challenge you on, but first give us the definition.
So radical humility or humble leadership really has 3 main parts. The first part is developing deep self-awareness, seeing myself in line with how others see me. And at the same time, with vulnerability, owning my shortcomings and not being afraid to say I messed up or I can do better. So that's the first one. The second piece is building meaningful and trusting relationships with our team members. Today, as a leader, we're facing an inversion of expertise, right? Our people always know so much more than we ever can about their specific area of expertise. For them to come to us with the data we need and require as the leader, they need to trust us. And the only way they trust us is if we've built meaningful and collaborative relationships with them. So that's number 2, rather than just leading by expertise, leading by relationship. And then the third sort of leg of the stool is what the famous growth mindset, right? So seeing mistakes and failures as an opportunity for learning and growing versus something to be ashamed of, or even worse, sweep under the carpet. So that's a lot I know, but that in a nutshell is what radical humility in leadership looks like.
I want to tackle that first one. I mean, I've read about a study that was done on this topic, and Harvard Business Review, I believe, reported on it. And the takeaway on that was that 95% of humans actually believe that they have high self-awareness, but only 10 to 15% actually do. So tackling the first part, the first leg of that stool, then, what advice can you give the leaders then to improve their level of self-awareness?
Right. So it's very simple, but it's not easy. Regularly asking for feedback from our team members. So at the end of a one-on-one we have, hopefully on a regular basis, ask the question, what do you see me do well as your manager, and what can I do better? So, aside from a formal 360, that is the most powerful and easiest way to improve my self-awareness. Regularly ask for feedback. And the point I'm making about this is, let's make this a regular habit. So it's not this big scary one-off thing we do once a year or once every 6 months.
Oh, yeah.
So get in the habit of regularly asking for feedback from not just your team members, but from your peers and from your bosses as well. Very simple, not always easy to do. It can be scary. I totally see that.
And if you can demonstrate that you can accept the feedback and actually do something with it, then you're setting a really great example then for those people who report to you then to do the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And, often people say, well, that's great, but how can I be sure my people will actually be honest with me, right? And so 2 things there. The first thing we can say is, hey, I actually see your ability to give me feedback, even if it's negative feedback, as part of your professionalism. I too find it scary sometimes to give feedback to my boss. So sort of tackling it head on. And the second tip around this is, we all know already, at least in vague terms, what we want to get better at and what we need to get better at. So we can say, hey, I know I'm not perfect at, bringing everybody along for a decision, for example, and I'm working on that. How have I been doing? So when we sort of state the goal we have for ourselves and invite our people to give a specific feedback around that, it makes it easier for them to be honest with us. So we sort of, use the goal we have and then make it safer for them to provide feedback.
I remember in your book, you had there's one section where you're talking about how you report out on the feedback that you've gotten during your 360s, and you phrase it as, here's what I suck at. It's very disarming, but I loved it.
Well, so the funny thing about this is, yeah, we all suck at certain things. Like, let's call it as it is. We really do.
Mm-hmm.
And but when we actually own that, and by the way, our team members already know that we're not perfect. They work with us every day. By the way, for all of our listeners who are parents, the same thing. Our kids already know that we're not perfect. By us simply owning that makes us relatable.
Especially if they're teenagers. Right?
That's right. Oh, yeah. Everybody admires perfection from a distance, but nobody can relate to it. So, yeah.
One of your interviews, you said, though, if you're uncomfortable with feedback, you should practice soliciting feedback. What's an exercise? How should I do that? Should I call in an equal level peer-to-peer and do it privately in an office? Say, I need to do this with my reports, or what's the best way to practice?
That's a perfect way, actually, Audrey.
Okay.
Like, even with somebody you feel super safe, somebody in your family, a friend, absolutely practice it like that. Yeah.
Okay. That sounds good. Do
we
we want to
one of the things that I think one of the most important things that a leader does is to create more leaders. Mm-hmm. And there's this chapter in your book about building a leadership factory. What can you talk a little bit more about that?
So that's exactly right. Making it the explicit goal of our teams to produce the next generation of leaders for our organization. So that, in a nutshell, is the leadership factory. So really looking at everybody on my team and asking myself, and then in dialogue with them, where can you go next? What is next for you? So making it the explicit goal to produce the next generation of leaders. And then, of course, people are reluctant to fully embrace this, because won't they leave if we make them even more employable? But our ironic truth, and I know you know this from running your own business, the more we stretch our people, the more we challenge them, and while at the same time treat them well, the longer they hang around. And so the leadership factory actually counterintuitively makes people hang around longer. And when they leave, and it's often hard, and I know you talked about this in the previous episode, when they leave, they can actually become ambassador for our business and for our team in large organizations as well. So I encourage everybody to embrace this notion of actually losing your best players, because eventually they will all move on to greener pastures.
You have 5 shifts of then to now leadership. Number 2 is the one that I'm in a quandary over. Tough on results, tender on people. How does that work? Because you almost feel like if you have somebody who's not hitting their KPIs and stuff, mollycoddling them may not be the answer. What are you suggesting we do?
So what I'm suggesting is that we hold our people to the highest standards. I want to be very clear. Leading with humility does not mean being a pushover. Having the highest standards, holding them to the highest standards while treating them as human beings, developing deep and meaningful relationships with them. I write the chapter in the book where I quote the best commander I ever had in Kosovo. And he opened a very difficult conversation with me with these words. He literally said, I love you, Urs, and this work is not good enough. And his words made me shrink in my chair. And I, turned the ship around big time. And from that day forward, produced the best level of work. If he would have yelled at me, if he would have belittled me, I probably would have tuned him out. But because I knew that he cared for me on a personal level, made me really dig deep and do my best work. So the notion that we either have to be a good person or a tough leader is actually a false dichotomy. Being a good human and executing what needs to get done are not mutually exclusive. And sometimes the best thing we can do for our people is to actually let them go. It can be the most loving thing. I'm not suggesting that's the first thing we do, but it can be. So they're not mutually exclusive at all.
So as leaders, I mean, we try really hard to always project confidence and always project that, we're decisive, because if we waffle, we show, if we can't decide or something like that, that undermines our credibility as leaders. And same thing goes if people don't see us as confident in doing what we're doing. But, how do you balance that then with humility?
Well, that's an excellent question, right? So there are certainly times when we need to be decisive and we need to make the calls, but it doesn't mean that we always have to have the answer. It doesn't mean that we never admit when we're not sure. So it actually is important to sort of distinguish that, you can be highly confident as a leader. And in fact, I would put forward that humility and confidence actually go hand in hand. I have to be fundamentally confident in myself as a leader to actually humbly invite feedback because it's tough. The soft stuff is tough. It's not soft. It's tough. So it's a balancing act. There's no question about it. There's times when we need to be decisive. We need to put the foot down. I even talk about that in the book. Sometimes it's valuable to raise your voice even. And I debated this long and hard in the book on radical humility to put this in. But there is a place for that. But being decisive, being confident does not mean that we always have to have the last word and that we always need to have all the answers. It's perfectly acceptable to say, I'm not sure, let's talk about this as a leader.
I have a question about scaling this system and this philosophy of yours. This works great if you're in a small business. What if you're the CEO or vice president of a company with 1,000 employees? I mean, you can't have relationships with all 1,000 people.
No, you can't. But that's exactly right. But you can build deep relationships with your immediate teams, and you demonstrate and you model their kind of behaviors that you want to see scale through the organization. The higher we rise, right, we get stuff done through other people. Who can we influence directly? It's the people directly around us, and then they scale downward. So that's, and by the way, I mean, I quote some of the best leaders in the book. I know Hubert Joly, who turned Best Buy around with a deeply humble approach. He spent his first week on the job as turnaround CEO working on the floor of a Best Buy store with a name tag that read CEO in training, right? So he understood humbly learning from the front lines would best equip him on how to turn the ship around. So it's scalable in that we influence our immediate team and that then trickles downward.
One of the things I think that all businesses can learn from the military is the concept of the after action review. And, it's something I've incorporated here since the very first day that I started the company. And when you do that, you talk about 3 different types of failures and how leadership needs to respond to that. Can you, share a little bit more about that?
Absolutely, yeah. So, and thank you about the after action review. Can I quickly say something about that? So
Sure.
The best after action, or post-mortems, we call them often in business. We look at what went well and what do we need to improve. The best after action reviews are the ones where the top dog, the CEO, goes first, and says, this is what I did well, and this is where I screwed up. And that makes it then safe for everybody else on the team to own their mistake as well. I talk about an after-action review I had in the military in the Middle East 2 years ago, where the commanding officer opened the after-action review exactly like that. And that made it then safe for everybody to own their own mistakes as well. So I talk about preventable failures to answer your question. So these are the things, procedures in our businesses that are well known. We don't want failure there. These are the checklists, the procedures that are clearly identified. And then on the other end of the spectrum is the intelligent failures. So these are, think of it as scientific experiments. We don't want to fail either, but when we fail, we actually can celebrate it because we learn something valuable and new. And most failures fall in the middle. They're complex failures. So they're well-known procedures, and a new and different factor has been imposed on them. So the response to each of these failures needs to be different. The preventable failure, we might need to look at training, systems improvements. If somebody on purpose broke a rule, we need to let them go. Intelligent failures, we actually need to celebrate that we failed because we learned something new and valuable.
As long as we learn something new.
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
Yes.
I mean, and coming back to your earlier question, I want the best idea to win, not necessarily mine. The best idea. And I probably don't have the best idea as a leader, but it's my job to facilitate the conversation, the process in my team so that the best idea bubbles to the surface, not just mine.
And those postmortems have to have full transparency and people admitting the mistakes that they made, which is another one of your 5 shifts. Those 2 things have to be.
That's exactly right. And there's people have written about that. The best after action reviews is where rank is switched off, humility is switched on, right? And you as the leader, you as a top dog need to model the sort of behavior you want to see on your people's part. And that then makes for the best after action reviews.
That goes back to the old adage of check your ego at the door.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so here's a question that both Audrey and I want to know the answer to. Whatever. This is often a bit of a tangent, but it's like I can't let you go without asking this question. How does one become a UN peacekeeper? I mean, I'm guessing it's nothing that you can't just do a weekend workshop at the Marriott, right? So how does that actually happen?
Yeah.
That is the best way this question ever has been asked. You can't just do it. I love that. No, it's not just a weekend workshop. So I don't want to get I'm happily answering the question, but I don't want to get too technical. I'm Swiss. So I serve through the Swiss Armed Forces. We have a national service model in Switzerland. Everybody serves in their 20s. But then I moved abroad and I lived in Australia and now in the States for the last 22 years. So I actually volunteered to go back in for a peacekeeping mission. And it was a full-on 4-day assessment, psych, role play, medical, the whole shazam. And then it was, depending on between 2 weeks and 3 months of training to become a peacekeeper. So I underwent all that and then deployed into Kosovo in the Balkans in 2017. And then 2 years ago, I was in the Middle East for a year. So, just briefly on the peacekeeping, I'm not sure if that's interesting to your listener, but, people often ask me, well, when do peacekeepers actually get deployed? So if we look at the recent example, a sad example, Russia and Ukraine eventually will come to a ceasefire, we hope. And when they do, they'll turn to the UN and say, hey, UN, we'd like a peacekeeping force who monitors and observes the ceasefire on the ground. And then the UN turns to all its member countries, the US, France, Switzerland, so forth, and recruits troops. And so I was one of those troops that got recruited.
It's one thing that a leader usually is, it's a peacekeeper. I mean, right?
You have a whole extra attitude. I wondered how much diplomatic training was, for you to have context when you're on the ground. But is there diplomacy training, or because that's a very academic exercise, the diplomatic?
Well, so, there is a very military component to it. So in the Middle East, we were, patrolling in armored vehicles with our flak jackets and helmet on the ceasefire line. You have to observed the ceasefire agreement, meaning that many battle tanks, that many artillery systems within X kilometers of the ceasefire line. So that's very military. And then there's, of course, the diplomatic piece. When you start to engage with the village elders, when you talk to the police commander,
Wow, yeah.
then it's all about, how do you hold a conversation, how to get the information out of the other people.
You've had such an interesting life and career. It's urskoenig.com, everyone. I'm going to spell it. It's URSKOENIG, everyone. And just the transition from that part of your life into this book, it's so interesting, but it all makes sense in the end,
Well, thank you. So just on that, actually, I've been an executive coach for 20 years. And then for us, who preach to people or coach people on how to become better leaders, it's so healthy for us to go back into an organization, in my case, the military, with peers, direct reports, bosses, and actually live in our clients' shoes. And I just loved. I love leadership as a coach. I love leadership in the military. I just live and breathe it.
Well, everybody get the book, and we've got our copies here. And if you were in studio and we were all together, I'd get an autograph for sure. This has been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. It was great. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and recommend on iTunes, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more great information at salesfuel.com.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.